Episode 4, Dinobot Island Part 2 is what we're going to get into this time, so let's get after it. This is Energon Entries. Welcome to Energon Entries, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Freites. I hope that this finds you well, and I want to thank you once again for coming back to this podcast, or if it's your first time, welcome, and I hope that you enjoy the content. So let's get into the episode recap. The episode opens with Megatron lording over the scene of his perceived victory, the tar pit that swallowed the Dinobots. He orders the Decepticons to suck the island dry of its resources, even dismissing Starscream's warning of what that might cause. After repairing Teletran 1, the supercomputer alerts the Autobots to energy anomalies in the city where Spike and Bumblebee were last seen. The Autobots arrive on the scene, rescue Spike and Bumblebee, and get the mammoths and cavemen back into the time warps before they closed. Back at Autobot headquarters, new Autobots Perceptor, Beachcomber, and Human Chip Chase are researching these time anomalies. During this research, 2 more anomalies are discovered, one at sea and one in the country. 2 groups of Autobots are sent to these anomalies and escort the humans back to their respective time warps, as Chip traces all of this back to Dinobot Island. Back on Dinobot Island, the Dinobots free themselves and find the state the Decepticons have left Dinobot Island. They vow to stop their enemies. Using jetpacks, the Autobots arrive and confront the Decepticons. The Dinobots arrive as the Decepticons have the Autobots down for the count and use their powers and those of the real dinosaurs to scatter the Decepticons. The episode ends with Optimus Prime praising the loyalty of the Dinobots, declaring their place at Autobot headquarters. So since this is a 2-parter, we get the narrator leading us off with a great recap. I love the voice so much, it's just iconic, it always gives you the feel, so whenever we come back from a 2-parter, I always get right back into the swing of things because of this voice. So here we are in this episode. Starscream is showing some science knowledge by trying to warn Megatron about what draining the island's energy might do. And I think that Starscream is coming around and trying to think rationally, but as always, he is using this and hoping for an opening to get Megatron's leadership gig. He's always trying to do that, and this is just another example of that. And hey, look at that. They once again fixed the Ark, they fixed Teletran, and maybe, just maybe, they could avoid having it go awry again by stopping battling in headquarters. I really don't understand why the Autobots fire their weapons so often in headquarters. Maybe practice outside. And I think Spike, when he was like, hey, that's where Spike went, and they literally had just discussed that right before Sparkplug said it. So they're talking about where Spike and Bumblebee went. Teletran 1 goes off, and all of a sudden Sparkplug is like, hey, that's where they went. And it was very exposition. It's like, oh, hey, in case you didn't remember from 2 seconds ago, this is where they went. Or maybe you haven't seen the previous episode, whatever. It was just very obvious exposition. I love that. Part 1 showed all the new Autobots, but really they hadn't been seen since that moment, so we really haven't seen that. And it's been an interesting sort of introduction to these robots, and I find it funny because they haven't really introduced them properly. They did a better job of that in season 1. So far in season 2, it just seems like, hey, let's throw some robots out there, intrigue some of the kids. Maybe they'll go out and try to find some of the toys, even if we haven't told them what their names are yet. The gibberish sounds that were made by the cave people I thought were just hilarious because in my mind, in 2024, it really speaks to what I think back then they thought a stereotype would have been of a caveman, and nobody knows how they would have sounded. Nobody knows if they spoke English. Nobody has a clue as to what those people would have even looked like, how they would have lived, whatever. But in the 80s, we trafficked in a lot of what would have been stereotypes at the time, so I just thought that was actually quite funny. And in all of this battling, Ironhide has yet another sticky goo that he can use. And this one shoots out of some sort of like 3-pronged shooter. So Ironhide has the ability to do quite a bit without the use of his hands. He's one of the Autobots, or at least the Transformers in general, who I feels like maybe has the most secondary powers. Now, you can make the argument that no Autobot or no Transformer has a secondary power. Those are their powers. I would contend that transforming is probably their primary power because they're robots that can turn into vehicles and other such things. So Ironhide seems pretty I would say he's pretty reliable. I would say he's pretty important because he has a lot of tools that have gotten them out of a lot of jams to this point. I'm a little confused as to how firing their weapons at these time warps kept it open. They're slowly closing, and I guess maybe an energy surge is what caused them to come about in the first place. But firing their weapons just seems like a very easy solution when nobody really told them that. It was just sort of something that they decided to do. And I want to know, so as all this is happening, there's chaos ensuing all over the place. The Autobots that went to clean up the messes, they were all old Autobots. And I say old as in they were the ones we've seen from season 1 consistently. We had, I think, 6 introduced in the first part of this episode, and now all of a sudden they're not there to help. That seems a little weird. And then we go back to the Ark, and all of a sudden there are not just new Transformers, but ones we haven't seen before, and that's Beachcomber and Perceptor. And they're in the Ark ready to help Chip Chase. And it's like, they introduce some, we never see them, and then they introduce newer ones, and we get these names, but we don't see the old ones come in. There's a little inconsistency in how all of this is being presented. So all these Autobots go, and of course, the time warp opens up in the sea, so you get pirates. And of course, they're out in the middle of the country, so you're gonna get cowboys and the cavalry and all that stuff. And I love that, obviously. I think it's appropriate. But I love also that the pirates board a rich yacht, and then the cowboys find a biker gang, because it's like, what is the new age equivalent of this? I guess you could say a pirate ship is looking to steal and loot all these different things, so a yacht would be sort of like the modern day plundery sort of Sodom and Gomorrah, I guess, equivalent. And of course, a biker gang. I mean, a biker gang really is modern cowboys, even today in 2024. So I thought that was pretty cool. And yes, it's stereotypical, but it also was appropriate, I think. And we have yet another Autobot. So as we're trying to fix the time warp at the sea, here's another swimming Autobot called Sea Spray. And that's random. And now all of a sudden we have Trax, who was one of the Autobots that was very, very briefly seen in a cleanup scene in episode 1. And we see that he can fly, and he has the ability to make it dark for some purpose. Then it was used in this episode. I think it's great that it's so random. The introduction of new robots in this season, specifically in these last 2 episodes, has been so random. It was almost as if the company, maybe Hasbro, wasn't thinking this through. And they saw season 1. It was obviously a success to the point that they created season 2. And then it's almost like they thought, let's wait a few episodes to see if we still have a hit on our hands. I don't think that's how it was done. I think that they created a lot of these episodes in advance, but it seems almost like the first 3 episodes went well. Let's throw a whole bunch of robots in here. They had to have had a plan that was a lot more thought out than that, but when you watch this, you have to think that that's almost how it went, because it is so random and it is lacking any sort of consistency. But of course, you have the OG Autobots, and they are helping to do these rescues, but they're necessary because these new robots don't seem to know where to go or don't seem to know what the protocols are. And that would tell me that they're very new. So this episode, I think, has been enlightening in a way, because it's like we're going to have new robots, new Autobots moving forward. But I hope we get a little bit more of a story as to how they got here, because it's really all over the map. And just from their activity, you think that they just got here literally seconds before they went out there. And I'm thinking specifically Sea Spray, because he didn't have any idea where to go. And he needed the OG Autobots to help out. As they're trying to clean up these messes, the Autobots do something that would be more on the side of the Decepticons. And they are essentially shooting these people to try to get them back in these time warps. I find that funny, because there's a really thin line as to, well, what happens if they hit one of them? They're trying to save them, but they're shooting at them, scaring the living crap out of them. And how do these people know to run back into the time warp? Again, it's like it's not really much of a plan, and it seems more like things could go wrong. It's a high risk factor here, just something that I thought about. And they spent so much time fixing these time warps, they seemingly didn't have enough time to find out where they were coming from or why they came into existence even before doing any of this research. So they just kind of reacted. Once again, no proactive out of them. I mean, they've got to figure this out. However, we do have Autobots with jetpacks, so there's a little bit of continuity, because Bumblebee had one. I did ask last episode, hey, does this mean they're going to fly more often? And we see them in this episode. Whether we see them now going forward is a different story. And then when we get to this large battle on Dinobot Island, we finally get the damn roll call that we've been waiting for, and it included some of the new Autobots. It was really, it was a roll call, but it was Optimus Prime saying all of their names. Boom, boom, boom. Now we know who they are. So the Dinobots managed to get the tar off themselves with their fire and their weapons, and that's pretty cool. And they're getting to the battle, they're trying to save the Autobots, and in this battle, Megatron once again hits somebody dead on with his fusion cannon, zero effect, or almost no effect. And I think that's interesting. And in this battle, there's another new Autobot that we've never seen, and that's Warpath. He's a tank. He introduces himself, as a matter of fact. And there's the new Decepticon Blitzwing, who we have seen before, but we didn't know could turn into a tank. And we know his name because I believe Warpath said it. So the introductions are starting to happen, but they're happening randomly. And now it seems to me, as I'm watching this, each side is going to get some type of a vehicle and the other side is going to get almost an equal reaction. So in this instance, we have a tank for a tank. Is that going to happen going forward? We'll see, but I think it could be a precursor. And the Autobots being saved by real dinosaurs as the Dinobots turn the tide is great. Because I feel like the Autobots have said that dinosaurs are stupid, and now they're using the dinosaurs to defeat the Decepticons, so they might want to actually put some respect on some dinosaurs' names. And the episode ends with the Dinobots finally, they've been used many times up until this point, proving their worth and being allowed to stay with the Autobots at headquarters. Remember, they had stayed there before, but behind a closed door. Now, I would assume they're able to sort of mingle around with everybody else. And so my overall thoughts on this two-parter, the biggest takeaway was clearly the introduction of new Autobots and new Decepticons, but more new Autobots than Decepticons. And while it was done in a very, very strange way, the Autobots' ranks have now been bolstered. So I'm assuming we're going to get a few more, or at least a little bit different confrontations going forward. Will we get any backstories about these? I don't know. But maybe we will, maybe we won't. But the roll call of new Autobots seen in these two episodes, we had Inferno, we had Red Alert, Grapple, Trax, Beachcomber, Perceptor, Smokescreen, Sea Spray, and Warpath. And for the Decepticons, we saw 4, Dirge, Ramjet, Thrust, and Blitzwing, all of which are either flying related, and Blitzwing, I believe, is a triple changer, and he is also a tank. I believe that the sole purpose of these episodes was to introduce new robots, aka introduce new toys. That's just my opinion, but I think it's pretty obvious. And I thought it was a nice touch for the Dinobots to finally be seen as a part of the crew. Up until this point, they had sort of been outcasts, and the Autobots are known for inclusion. They try to save the humans at every turn, but weren't giving the Dinobots that same sort of acceptance. And now we're going to see what happens with these new robots. We're going to see how the tide turns in this war. And I think from now until the end of season 2, we're going to get a lot more stories and a lot more depth to these stories, and hopefully a lot more fun. Have you watched this episode recently? What did you think of it? I'd love to hear from you. Email me, mattyicemedia@gmail.com, or find me on Twitter @mattyiceFreights is the handle for that. Hope everybody enjoyed this. I hope this finds you well. I hope this finds you safe, and we'll talk to you next time. This is Energon Entries. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Energon Entries are those of Matt Freightz and his guests, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Energon Entries is exclusively owned by Matt Freightz and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.